going on, guys? Welcome back to this week's episode of Outside the Arena. I'm Griff, joined by my co-host Rob Goldberger. And before we start today, I do just want to acknowledge the day we are filming this. I'm not quite sure if you'll see this either today or tomorrow. It is 9/11. So real quick before we start, on behalf of me, on behalf of Rob, we want to send out our condolences and prayers to those whose loved ones didn't come home that horrific day 20 years ago. We will never forget. And it's a very sad day in this country. And, may their memories live on forever. And with that, though, we will go back to what we do mostly, even on a day like today, which is talking about football and sports, something that honestly brought the country back together a little bit right after 9/11. I know that Mike Piazza home run to me is something that always is in mind as something that, really gave people a chance to smile right after those horrific events. But we did see a Thursday night football game this week, the first game of the NFL season, and it was a fantastic game, one of the best games the NFL could have hoped for this upcoming season. Bucs Cowboys opening night. The Buccaneers squeezed this one out on a last-second field goal, 31-29. We saw the return of Dak Prescott. He looked very good. He threw the ball 58 times. That was pretty crazy to see how much they were throwing the football. Amari Cooper had a big game. CeeDee Lamb had a big game. And on the flip side for the Bucs, Tom Brady, he just looks, as good as ever. This guy literally doesn't age. We saw AB have a good game. Godwin played well. Gronk looks good. So it was a really good overall game. And I'll start with you, Rob. I know we talked last week on this podcast about the expectations for this game, and we both kind of agreed that this would be, a very, potentially big win for the Buccaneers. And it really was not what we expected. Dallas came out and played a lot stronger, at least than what I thought they would. So, what were your thoughts on this game, on how Dallas performed, and, for the first game of the NFL season, what a game it really was?
Yeah. I mean, I was shocked to see, how well the Cowboys performed. You can make the argument if Greg Zuerlein had performed up to his standards, we could be talking about a Cowboys victory right now. And, that didn't happen, obviously, but a super impressive showing by the Cowboys. I think it's a little concerning the fact that they had, a 4-1 turnover ratio and still lost, but you got to give credit to Dak, man. I mean, first game back, threw the ball 58 times and looked, as good, if not better than he did last season. I think the guy's going to be a legit MVP candidate. But, I mean, Tom Brady, man, he's inevitable. He's the best of all time. 44 years old. It doesn't even sound real, and he's still dominating. But, yeah, I mean, I got to give credit to the Cowboys, which pains me to say. But Dak was great. I think, the big question mark still is that Cowboys defense. And can they come through when it matters?
Yeah, that is the big question when talking about the Dallas Cowboys. I mean, the offense is going to be there. And clearly, I mean, we'll touch on this in a bit, but, the clear, game plan here was Dak Prescott, not Ezekiel Elliott. They've really stayed away from Zeke. He was really primarily a blocker in this game. We'll touch on him and his fantasy value in a second. But like you said, I mean, Dak Prescott, this guy is one of the best right now in the NFL at the quarterback position. Not even a question anymore. He has really improved over the last few years. And last year we started to see a glimpse of it. And I think this year we're just going to see a full-on breakout, like you said, MVP caliber performance. 400 yards, 3 touchdowns. He's making all the throws. I mean, he had a lot of good throws. CeeDee Lamb in this game played good, but he had some drops in there that really, the one led to a turnover. It was a tough catch, give him that. But still, CeeDee Lamb, few drops. Amari Cooper, he came out this week, said, he thinks he's the best receiver in the NFL. And I mean, talk about a performance to back that up. 13 catches, 139 yards, 2 touchdowns. This guy is so underrated. I think people don't even really consider him in that top tier discussion. Yeah. And, I think it might be about time too. I think the talent's always been there. He's always been such a good route runner, can make those close catches. I mean, I think he's one of the best sideline catchers in the game. I feel like I've always seen highlights of this guy catching balls, tiptoeing it right in. He's very good. They did lose Michael Gallup, which, is a decent loss, but Cedric Wilson also looked good. So I'm not worried about Dallas's offense. It's that defense, like you said, which, there's definitely some question marks and holes there. And on the flip side, I mean, I think you covered it pretty well. Tom Brady, I mean, time does just not slow this man down, 44 years of age and performing just as good, if not better than he has, in his career. It's pretty incredible. I mean, the running game for them was non-existent, didn't really matter. I mean, Antonio Brown looked very good. I mean, when you've got Antonio Brown and Chris Godwin and Mike Evans, and AB looks to be in potential, I don't think he'll ever reach that prime form again. That was, historic levels of talent. But if he can come close to it, my God, I mean, this is going to be insane. I think last year he was still working his way in. He obviously was coming off that crazy wild year for him. So I think this is going to be the year where we're going to see AB bounce back, look good in game one. He looked good in the playoffs too, and leading up to that season, I think he started to find himself. Mike Evans, a bit of a disappointing performance, but that's what you expect with this offense. One guy is always going to struggle. They're not all going to have 300-yard games, especially when Gronk was as good as he has. And I think that's another thing that we might need to talk about. And I'll flip this to you after I state my point. I mean, Rob Gronkowski, at the beginning of last year, it seemed like he didn't necessarily have a role other than blocking. But slowly throughout the season, it seemed like Gronk was getting more and more involved. We saw in the Super Bowl, he had 2 touchdowns. It seems like they've kind of discovered this role for him. 8 catches, 90 yards, 2 touchdowns. I mean, I talk about another guy that if you can get close to his prime, it's unreal. And it really looks like Rob Gronkowski has found himself and once again is playing top tier football at that tight end position.
Yeah, I mean, you had a dynamic offense, even without AB and Gronk, even at 35% of their former selves. If they can get back to like even 50-60% of what they were 4 or 5 years ago, this team will cakewalk to the Super Bowl. I mean, this team will dominate. And on the flip side of the ball for the Bucs, Vita Vea was unreal on Thursday night. The guy's a machine, and you have to remember he wasn't there for them the majority of that playoff run. So if he can continue to dominate like he has, and those two dudes, Gronk and AB, I mean, when you saw that AB touchdown, the rest of the league just had to go, this guy, the team. I just think they're unstoppable at this stage. I think the offensive line is one of the 3 or 4 best in the league. Tom Brady's Tom Brady. The big question will be if they can get that running game going with Ronald Jones and Leonard Fournette there. They both might have some, fumble drop problems, but I don't to have that as your biggest concern. I mean, I think this team is just so well-rounded. I think Shaq Barrett, Vita Vea, defensively, you got Jamel Dean in the secondary. I think this team is just unbelievably good. And I think if Gronk and AB even get back to 50% of their former selves, you're talking about a historically great offense.
Yeah, I mean, you said it best. I mean, Gronk and AB, those are 2 of the greatest offensive players at the position in their prime of all time. And if these guys can get to, a great level or good percentage back of that form with Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, 2 guys that probably right now I'd say are in their prime or so, boy, oh boy. And the defensive side, I mean, the one concern, we got to mention something at least that's, a downside to the Bucs. The secondary is not their necessarily strongest point. And it didn't look amazing in this game. They got beat and they were going up against good receivers. But at the end of the day, you're going to face good receivers. You look at all these top teams and the receivers they have, it's a lot of very good wide receiver groups. So that is the one concern with the Bucs. I mean, Sean Murphy Bunting, I believe he left the game with an injury. I'm not too sure if he's good to go, if he's going to be out a while. I'm not 100% sure on what the diagnosis was. That's something to stay alert to. He is a pretty good, he was playing very good down the stretch for that team as well. So the secondary is something to keep an eye on. Last year, though, they still won the Super Bowl with that secondary, and it's because of that front 7. It's incredible. Like you said, Vita Vea, just so talented, and he wasn't even there last year, really, that playoff run. I believe he just was able to play in the Super Bowl, and he might have even been a little limited in that game. So really, I mean, this team is potentially unstoppable, offensively and defensively is, top 5 defense. I mean, I think easily. Secondary issues, we'll see if it can bite them, in the neck at all. But I mean, good performance from the Bucs, but I also think Dallas Cowboys impressed a lot of people, and the NFC East, I think, took a serious look and said, "Oh, these boys might be winning this division."
Yeah, definitely. It's a little.
So I want to talk to you. Yeah, it definitely is a little concerning. I mean, I think that's a good point, to talk about real quick, and then we'll jump to some fantasy sides of this past game. Are you confident now that this is Dallas's division to lose after that week 1 performance? Or, I mean, do you think Washington is still going to be the team that's a little pesky? I know I kind of said, I think in our predictions that Washington would be the division winner. I believe you said it was Dallas, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So kind of what are your thoughts? I mean, especially after this game, I'm assuming you're holding still with that prediction.
I think this is pretty clearly Dallas's division to lose. I think, combined with Washington playing a first place schedule, that's going to come back to bite them certainly. And I just think you look at the offense, Washington's defense is clearly much better than Dallas's, but I think, the comparison, on the most important position in the field, quarterback, Fitzpatrick versus Prescott. I mean, it's not even it's not even a competition. I think this is very clearly Dallas's division to lose. I think there's one man that could maybe mess this up for Dallas, and that's Mike McCarthy. But I think Kellen Moore and Dak Prescott working together has been unreal. I think Kellen Moore is going to get serious consideration for a head coaching job in the offseason, and that might even be Dallas's head coaching job because we know Jerry's a big fan of Kellen Moore, and I don't really think he wants to see him and Dak split up anytime soon. But yeah, I think this is really Dallas's division to lose. I think they could even win this handily by 3 or 4 games.
Yeah, excuse me there. I agree with you. I'm fully on board that this is Dallas's division after that performance. I mean, you came within seconds of beating, the world champions of the past year, and you played them very close. The one concern with Dallas, as it has been this past few years, is just health. That's what's going to hold them back. We've seen Michael Gallup. He's going to miss some time. Lyle Collins was just suspended for 5 games for, I think, not appearing for a drug test or something like that. That's a pretty big impact. Zach Martin was already out with COVID. He should hopefully be back in the next week. Or, I mean, they played Thursday night. He'll be back next week. So that's good to see at least. But those are the slight things that can start messing you up, especially with that O-line. We know how important it is. We know how crucial it's been to their success. They got to stay healthy. And first week you lose Lyle Collins, Michael Gallup. Not necessarily the best thing to happen to your football team. Those guys are pretty important in that offense. But, getting Zach Martin back should be huge and whatnot. But what I do want to talk about right now, speaking of that O-line, Ezekiel Elliott, only 11 carries for 33 yards in this game, was pretty close at times to a touchdown. He had a catch. I know that, he was right there, maybe a little better thrown. He could walk in and, on a rush that a better block he was probably in as well. But a little underwhelming. I know fantasy-wise, owners were very upset. It seems this was very game plan related, though. So, fantasy-wise, what's your concern with Ezekiel Elliott? Do you still value him kind of top-tier RB level, or are you a little concerned after what you saw?
I'm a little concerned that he might not be on that absolute top tier of RBs, and speaking about fantasy. But I think he'll still be fine. I think he'll still get you the points you need to get. I mean, I think he's, could be an RB1 or even – I think he could probably be an RB1 on, a league-winning team. I just think the Cowboys – the Bucs rush defense is very good. We know this. I mean, we talked about it earlier. I think, as you said, it was a lot of game plan related. And I think they wanted to work Dak back into the things. And I think they knew they needed to throw the ball a lot to beat that high-powered Buccaneers offense. I think Zeke will be fine. I do think if he doesn't, this might be, speaking back to the real-life side of things quickly, this might be a cautionary tale. I mean, we've seen it before in paying, RB's big money because he's set to make 90 – this is year 1 of his contract extension. He is set to make $90 million over the next 5 years. So – it might not be too great for the Cowboys, but I think speaking of this year, I think Zeke will be fine fantasy-wise.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm not hitting the full panic button yet. I will say one thing I just noticed, Tony Pollard was definitely on there a lot more, seemed to be more of a receiving guy than in the past. It seems like his usage will be going up, which will be interesting to monitor. Obviously, Zeke, in those first few weeks with Dak last year, when everyone's looking at him as an RB3, he's getting a lot of receptions. So he only had 2 in this game. So it's definitely something to look at. Being a top RB, you really need to have a good receiving value unless you're getting the ball 25, 30 times a game or so, like Derrick Henry does. I'm not panicking. I do think it was a game plan kind of strategy with this one. They knew it wasn't going to go well, especially with Zach Martin now trying to run up the middle with Zeke and whatnot. So that's, you got to look at that. But, next week will be pretty telling. I'm not 100% sure who is on the schedule for them. I'll look at it right now. They got the Chargers. I mean, that's another quality run defense, but it's nowhere near the Buccaneers. And then the Eagles after that. So these next few weeks will definitely be telling. If Zeke still is struggling, not getting that volume after week 3, I'd say the panic button definitely should be hit. And, it could be, RB1 value could definitely be in trouble. But right now, still have him as an RB1. I don't think he's maybe a top 5 RB. I do think his volume won't be necessarily the highest this year as it has in past, but still maybe mid to back RB1 is where I'd put him right now. And he still has that upside if he can get the volume, to be one of those top RBs for sure.
Yeah, I agree.
And now on the flip side of things, another guy who was a little disappointing fantasy-wise, Mike Evans, only 3 catches, 24 yards. We touched on it a little bit, or at least I did. I mentioned how, it is going to be hard for all these guys to go off. So kind of your thoughts on the Buccaneers wide receiver room, who in this room would you say is your least favorite fantasy guy after week 1? Maybe it didn't change at all. kind of what are your thoughts on the wide receiver situation, fantasy-wise, with Tampa Bay?
I would have to say, I said this before the year. I don't know if I said it actually in our fantasy football group chat, but I said Mike Evans. I would still say he's probably my least favorite guy fantasy-wise. I think AB, especially after week 1, we know that relationship, Tom and AB have, and I just think he's going to keep racking up those receptions, and I think he's going to keep, getting those touchdowns. And like we said, if he can return to peak form, I don't think there's any doubt that AB will be just an absolute weapon in fantasy. And then Chris Godwin, I've been a big Chris Godwin fan since he's come out of college, fantasy wise and in real life. And I think he's one of the best red zone weapons. People would argue one, top 5 or 6 red zone weapons in the entire league. I think he's just the issue with him is whether he can stay healthy. But I think Godwin and Brown should be solid fantasy bets for the rest of the year. Evans, he has those up and down weeks, man. I think, he might be able to get you 10 to 14 points every week, but he just doesn't have the upside of those guys like Brown and Godwin, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. Evans is something that I'm a little worried about it, because I do think he will garner the attention of probably the best cornerback just because of his size and vertical ability. I think it's kind of a crapshoot each week with these guys. I think, it's hard to bench one of them if you don't have a guy on their level. Chris Godwin, I'd say, is the most safe, I think, especially after week 1. I think, even when he was playing last year, he was banged up, but, he was pretty consistent. He was a guy who would get you 15, 17 points on average each week with a little upside for more, and, he'd occasionally do less. But I think Godwin's the most consistent. Evans really seems to me kind of boom or bust. That's what we've seen from the past 2 years, is he'll have these games where he'll have a ton of touchdowns. He'll be looking at it in the red zone, but then he'll have games like this, 3 catches, 20 yards. So that's kind of what to expect out of Evans. And AB, I think AB is kind of a wild card. I honestly don't know how he'll fare this year. He obviously plays less than the other two in terms of snaps, but if AB can be what he has been in the past, he could be a very good wide receiver 2 and whatnot. So it's kind of a crapshoot with him, but I think Godwin is the safest bet. I do like AB. I like the connection with him and Brady, and Evans is just kind of a boomer bust guy. All 3 guys can be started on fantasy teams. You got to acknowledge that there's going to be weeks where they don't do very good, but then there'll also be weeks like this one for AB, for Chris Godwin, where they have huge weeks and your fantasy team is getting a big boost at that wide receiver position for the week. So that's kind of my thought on that. And real quick, Ohio State currently down 28-14, so not going good for the Buckeyes.
We're
gonna have to see what happens. 3 drives so far in that second half and 3 touchdowns we have seen for both teams. So we'll see what happens. It's not looking great for Ohio State. But with that, I do want to go talk about kind of the other real headline this past week or so in the NFL, which has been the Baltimore Ravens and their injuries. Obviously, J.K. Dobbins torn ACL. We knew that coming into the week. Justice Hill tears his ACL as well. And then the other day in practice, on consecutive plays, both, I believe, non-contact, Gus Edwards and Marcus Peters tear their ACLs. Pretty insane that they're losing those guys. Gus Edwards was primed for a big year. He's finally going to get that workload. That people wanted to see the Gus bus. I know he made headways in my fantasy group chat for school. But unfortunately, he tears his ACL. And Marcus Peters, that's their number 2 corner. He's been playing pretty solid. And he's getting up there in age, I have to be honest. So this torn ACL could really, prevent him from being that same guy again. Big injuries. Obviously, they go ahead and, sign a bunch of running backs. They bring in Latavius Murray, Devonta Freeman, Lev Bell now to sign. So it seems like it's going to be really a committee type group there. But obviously, devastating blows. Marcus Peters, potentially the more devastating one. But what are your thoughts on these injuries and, how this changes how the Ravens look in the
I think that
AFC North?
I think that Marcus Peters injury is absolutely killer. They got Marlon, it helps to have a guy like Marlon Humphrey on the other side. But I just think losing your CB2 for any team is just devastating. Personally, firsthand with the Eagles, I've seen them their cornerback play over the years, especially their second cornerback play, has not been the best. It's prevented them from making the playoffs a couple times. But I think that cornerbacks in this league, good cornerbacks in this league, their value outside of the quarterback position is almost unmatched. And Marcus Peters is a very, very good CB2. And I think on the other side of the ball, I don't think I've ever seen anything like this, where you have 3 running backs all season out, all season-ending injuries in a week. I'm really interested to see if Lev Bell still has anything left in the tank. Same with Devontae Freeman. I actually think Latavius Murray is going to be pretty good. He was pretty good with the Saints last year. I think he's going to be the number one running back going into the year. But I was a big Lev Bell fan before. He when he was in Pittsburgh. Hopefully, we saw the Adam Gase effect on him in in New York, and he didn't see too much playing time with the Chiefs. But yeah, I would imagine Latavius Murray is going to be the number one guy going into the year. We'll see how Freeman and Bell play behind him, but I just think that Peters' injury is devastating to a team, especially in a division with the with the caliber of the receivers in their division. Odell, Jarvis Landry, and obviously the plethora of guys Pittsburgh has.
Even the Bengals have good receivers too. T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, and Jamar Chase, who has made some weird comments about the balls this week and how he's struggling with it, which is pretty interesting to see. I mean, he's not looked good so far, so I think it might be a growing year for him, especially coming off that holdout. Yeah, I mean, I think this is Gus Edwards' injury is unfortunate. It's not as killer. I think the J.K. Dobbins one was really the killer. If you're going to talk about a running back for him, obviously, that Marcus Peters one though hurts. I mean, cornerback is not necessarily their strongest position anymore. Marlon Humphrey's a great player, but after that, I'm not too sure who is next up. I know they did draft like Sean Wade, but I believe they traded him. So I mean, they're probably looking at that and saying, maybe that was not so good a decision. But we got to see what happens. I mean, Baltimore's defense, I've mentioned it a few times, it is aging. Marcus Peters was part of that group, but he's still a great player, and this definitely hurts them a lot. Like you mentioned, those cornerbacks have no easy matchups in that division. All teams have very capable, multiple threats. So we're going to have to see. I mean, I think Baltimore, I think this to me, really to me makes it hard for them to win this division. I think this just makes it more Cleveland than it already has been to me. I mean, I've been on Cleveland, obviously a little biased, but I've said through and through that this will be the team that wins this division. And I just can't see the Ravens doing it now. I mean, you look at the Ravens, obviously you have Lamar, but the strong suit of that team was their defense. And a guy like Marcus Peters, that's a huge blow to what's supposed to be your strong suit that you don't see. The Browns, they don't really have weaknesses like that. I'm not saying it's a weakness, but they don't have, spots where you can look at and say, we don't really know what's going on there. I mean, the Browns are a pretty complete team as it is. So I think it's a big blow. I think, it's going to make it hard for them to win this AFC North, especially, I mean, they have so many injuries. Rashad Bateman's hurt. I mean, the number of guys just goes on and on. So we're going to have to see what happens this week. I mean, I think they're going to start that rookie Tyson Williams, I think, will be getting the start since he's the only one who knows what he's doing there at this point, which is pretty interesting. But it's a situation to monitor. It's a team to monitor. Lamar Jackson, he's going to have to carry that team is the essential goal. And I think Mark Andrews, another guy who, is going to have to play very well as well. He is, that he's the top guy now in that offense besides Lamar Jackson. No question about it. We'll see what he can do if he can have a big year and whatnot. But it's going to be very interesting to see how it plays out, but I do not think the Ravens anymore. I think this is a big blow, and I think it's going to be, very hard for them to win this division. That's for sure.
Definitely. I think a guy to monitor on that team also is, can Hollywood Brown piece it together? Because he's been, I mean, no way around it. He's been a big disappointment since coming into the NFL. He's had a couple flashes, but, he's nowhere near that guy we saw at Oklahoma. And if he can piece it together, I mean, and give Lamar, finally, Lamar, I think what's overlooked, whether he's being criticized, whether you're a fan or not, he hasn't really had a true wide receiver one since he's been in Baltimore. And I think if Hollywood can piece it together, it's going to be so huge to that offense. But I don't really see it happening. I think he has a huge drop problem. And I don't know, his size is kind of an issue. Yeah.
It's definitely something to monitor. He would be a huge X factor if he can get it going. They have some other guys, Sammy Watkins and whatnot, but it is looking a little bleak with the weapons once again for Mr. Lamar Jackson. So we'll see what happens with that. But that kind of does it, I think, with the NFL for this week. Obviously, the game on Sunday, if you're seeing this, either Saturday or Sunday, the games are coming. It's going to be super exciting. We did our predictions for that last week. So if you haven't already, go check that out. And while we're talking about the channel, please go ahead and subscribe. We really appreciate it. We want to get the numbers up. Like a video, drop a comment if you have any suggestions and whatnot. We'd really appreciate all of that. We're moving on from the NFL for a bit. We don't got too much more to cover, but I do want to touch a little bit on the MLB. And specifically, we could talk about the NL East. It really looks like the Braves are starting to kind of pull away from both the Phillies and the Mets. But the team that I want to focus on the past week has been the New York Yankees. They have lost, I believe it is now 7 in a row after a mega defeat last night to the New York Mets. 10-3 it was. It was very ugly for those Yankees. So, I mean, last week when we talked, you said, the Yankees in that wild card picture were the best team. They were the team to beat. And all of a sudden, there's 4 teams within one game that are right there.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this whole wild card situation? And, the Yankees specifically, what are you thinking with them now?
I don't even know what to say at this point because in 5 days, I'm going to look stupid.
Yeah.
The Blue Jays are on fire, obviously. But I don't know. I think the Yankees could still piece it together. I really do. I think they're going through a little bit of a rough stretch, but I think they're so talented. I think they're probably, I don't know. The Blue Jays and the Yankees. Those are the 2 teams I'm behind probably for that second wild card spot. I think the Red Sox will probably shore up that first spot. But yeah, I'm still going with the Yankees. But like I said, I'll probably look stupid 5 days from now when they lose 12 in a row instead of 7.
Yeah, I mean, it's a crazy situation what's going on. I mean, just watching the game last night, I hadn't watched many Yankee games, obviously, recently in this losing streak, but they just do not look good right now. I mean, I saw one of the arguably the worst baseball plays I've ever seen with Gary Sanchez in that tag. I mean, that was insane how bad that was. They were just making errors. They're not hitting the ball right now.
No.
It's not looking good for them. And their rotation, that's a huge problem too. Garrett Cole, I mean, he's rumored to have some issues, with his injury. I'm not sure what the update is. Tyone's now in the IL. Kluber's come back. He hasn't looked amazing since he's been back. Montgomery got rocked last night. So the rotation's a little, fishy now. They've got the bullpen. Guys are hurt, Loziga and whatnot. I don't know. I'm not a huge believer right now in the Yankees. They could totally turn it on and prove me wrong, but just the way that team is right now, I'm not huge on them. There's some very interesting teams. The Blue Jays, like you mentioned, I mean, you got to look at them and think that team should find a way in the playoffs the way they're playing that offense. And that would be electric, I think, for baseball to have that offense in there. And also the Blue Jays fans, they're such good fans. I mean, you see them whenever they're in the playoffs. That is an electric atmosphere at the Rogers Center. So that's good for baseball, to be honest. So I'd love to see the Blue Jays there. Mariners would be a great story. They've kind of been, stringing together wins recently. And then there's the A's. The A's are always right in the hunt. They had a bit of a fall off, but they're playing better baseball now. Matt Olson, Matt Chapman, those are the guys there. Marte as well. So there's a bunch of teams right in the mix. If I had to name a team that would win that second spot, for me, it's the Blue Jays. I think they're the best team right now in the way they're playing. Yankees, I mean, you can't count them out. It's definitely looking not amazing, but I don't think the Mariners will pass them. I mean, I'm not huge on the Mariners. I feel like they're a little just not that good, to be honest. If I'm, being honest, they've had a great year and it'd be fantastic for them to end that playoff drought. And I know they're pushing for it, but we'll see what happens with them. The A's, we'll see how they play. I mean, this team could go and win. We've seen them go win 10 in a row, or they could also lose 10 in a row like the Yankees. I mean, they're kind of streaky like that. So maybe the A's get hot, they squeeze in, or maybe they fall off the face of the earth and, are nowhere near contention. So it'll be interesting to see for sure. But what a wild week, especially for the New York Yankees.
Yeah, I mean, the Yankees are clearly a very hot and cold team. I think we can make that clear about them. And I don't know. I just don't like to bet against the Yankees. I've seen it too many times. I hate their guts. I know you do probably more than I do. But I'd like to see the Blue Jays or the Mariners get it. I'm a big Vladdy guy, but I just can't pick against the Yankees. I've seen them do it too many times. And yeah, I think that Yankees Red Sox wild card game would also be pretty awesome.
Yeah, that would be pretty insane. I mean, just a week or so ago, the Yankees looked like they had that top wild card spot locked up. They're going to be playing at home, and all of a sudden, it's completely changed. I mean, it is insane how far away that team has fallen off. It is pretty incredible. But other than that, in MLB, I mean, NL East, I don't even think it's really worthy to talk about right now. It's kind of just, I mean, to me, I think this will be the Braves division unless one of the Phillies or Mets really can catch fire here. It just is, the Braves have, a pretty easy schedule, and, they're beating up on the bad teams that sometimes the Mets and Phillies, they've struggled. The Mets lost 2 out of 3 to Miami. Phillies lost last night to Colorado, I believe it was. So those are games these teams got to win, especially if they're going to be hunting in it. It's disappointing. Mets only won 3 of 5 from the Nats. I mean, it just seems like it's not looking great for either of those teams. I'd say the Braves probably are gonna. It looks even clearer to me now that the Braves will be
and I
the
think
playoff team.
I think there's one pitch that succinctly summed up the Philly season quite well. 1 pitch away from a win. We're up 1. There's a runner on first, and Ian Kennedy who we traded for, by the way, throws probably the worst curveball I've ever seen on an OTP. I think you probably could have thrown a better curveball. It was like an eephus pitch, and it was hit about 500 feet out to right field. And then not only that, he follows it up by giving another home run, and the Phillies lose 4-3.
I mean, with the Mets and Phillies, sometimes you can't even make it up. It's that good, and it is just so perfectly scripted sometimes that it just you can only laugh sometimes. Is how it kind of goes. So that's that, and I think that really kind of does it for baseball. We'll keep talking about it weekly, especially as we get closer to the playoffs. We'll do, once the playoff bracket is out, we'll make sure to get a, we'll each fill that out and share that with you guys, as well as covering all the games. But with that, real quick before we end this week's episode, we will talk a little college football. We haven't touched on it yet, and I think the game we've been, hinting at right now, Oregon, Ohio State. Oregon currently up as, the third quarter about to close 28-14. So honestly, it looks like they're going to be closing this one out and, being able to win this game. I mean, they're running attack. CJ Verdell really leading it, 14 carries, 136 yards, 2 touchdowns. That kid is a superstar. And Ohio State, I mean, the difference, their run game, it does not look that good today, to be honest. I know the box score looks, fooling, 11 for 58, but there's been a lot of struggling attempts. They were trying to run the ball on fourth down. It was not looking good. The receivers are fantastic, no doubt about that. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. But CJ Stroud so far, I mean, at least to me, he's struggling. There's definitely some, quick early mistakes, early, overthrows early on. I know the box score looks very good, but just watching him, I mean, it's just not been, I haven't been too impressed with CJ Stroud, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I mean, Ohio State has had fantastic quarterback after fantastic quarterback. I mean, since the start of the college football playoff era, and even before that to Braxton Miller. I mean, we'll see if CJ Stroud can link that up. He looked fine against Minnesota. I mean, I think that game was closer than it should have been, but
first half was ugly. I'll say that, but
the
second half he figured it out and looked very good, as well as the whole Ohio State team.
But CJ Verdell, that's an NFL guy right there. I mean, I think he could have been an NFL guy last year. He decided to go back to school, I believe, right? He's a senior. He's been one of the best running backs in the country since he was a freshman, and he's now a senior. And the guy is a killer. I mean, he has 3 total touchdowns on the day. He's an unbelievable receiver for running back too. He's a defensive killer, and I think we all know how much more valuable the running back is in college football compared to the NFL. And I'm kind of shocked at this right now because Oregon was struggling against Fresno State last week, and now they're coming into maybe the toughest atmosphere in the country. Teams don't really win at the Hurst all too often, and they looks like they're going to pull it out. I mean, up 2 touchdowns in the beginning of the fourth quarter.
Yeah, it is. As an Ohio State guy who supports Ohio State, it's kind of crazy to watch. I mean, this team is, I think there's just a lot of inexperience with some of these guys. There's a lot of guys who left that linebacking core specifically. This year, their linebacker play has been bad, if I'm being honest. It's not been good. You lose guys like Tuck Borland. You lose, really, Pete Werner was another guy. Those guys were so impactful, and you don't even realize it because these aren't big names, but those guys were so big of it in the scheme of things. And now you see them down. They're just struggling. They can't stop the run right now. The pass has not really killed them. They've got decent corners, but it's just been a struggle for them. I think there's a lot of inexperience even at the quarterback position. We've seen Stroud struggle. It's tough to watch, honestly, right now. They didn't play good week 1, and now they're getting beat. They don't look to be that number 3 team that they're ranked as. If they lose this week, it'd be pretty hard for them to make the college playoff, obviously. So we'll see what happens. Another team that, probably out of it for this college playoff is Clemson. They had a extremely underwhelming week 1. I'm trying to find the box score on here. Let's see, where is it? I believe it was a
10-3.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, it was a very low-scoring game.
Yeah, and the only touchdown of the game was scored on a pick 6. So
pretty crazy. But one thing in this game that was very interesting, DJ Uiagalelei, I'm probably most Uiagalelei. I apologize, CJ or DJ, if you're somehow watching this. He did not look good at all. 19 for 37, 170 yards and interception. This is the guy who people said was right in that Heisman race, and he looked horrific, to be honest. What were your thoughts on that Clemson initial game? Obviously, I don't think this team will be in the playoff with their easy schedule, and they don't really have an ability to get any incredible wins. This was their only chance, and it was a absolute disaster of a performance from Clemson.
I think Clemson's, getting into the playoff really hinges on how Georgia plays the rest of the year. Because if Georgia wins the
Yeah.
SEC and has a perfect record, I could definitely see, and Clemson doesn't lose the rest of the year, I could definitely see Clemson getting into the playoff, just because they're Clemson also.
Yeah.
But I think that Georgia defense is the best in the country. I think that defense is unbelievable. I think they have a ton of NFL talent. I think the only defense that really rivals them is their neighbors down in Alabama. And I think my pick to win the SEC would probably still be Alabama, but I think that Georgia team is legit. I think they're a top 3 or 4 team in the country, maybe a top 2 team in the country as they're ranked this week. But yeah, I was disappointed in Uiagalelei's performance. But I think that game really could have gone either way. I think there was some conservative decision making from Dabo. But yeah, I was a little disappointed in Clemson's performance. I wouldn't rule them out of the playoff yet, though, and I think Georgia is really legit. So, yeah.
That's fair. And I think real quick before we move on, one thing that, I think is immediately you can just look at the box score even and see it. It's that no longer having Travis Etienne. I mean, his presence, he was such a dynamic rusher and, receiver for them. And you look at them, I mean, they just couldn't get the rushing game going. They had, Lynn J. Dixon. I don't know if he's a back. I didn't watch the game, if I'm being honest. Kobe Pace, Will Shipley. These guys, none of them had more than 10 yards rushing. I mean, that is huge. If this team was unable to run the ball, regardless of how Georgia is defensively, you got to be able to run the ball, especially in college football. That's a pretty big thing. It says Uiagalelei. I'm botching that. I'm just going with it. 14 for -22. I don't know what happened there. If he lost like 20 yards on one play or what the deal happened.
They count sacks as rushing yards in college football, I believe.
Okay. So still weird. I mean, that's just abysmal. I mean, that's Clemson, if you can't rush the ball, you're not going to really have success here. So very embarrassing game for them, but we'll see what happens. The year is still young. Ohio State did just get the ball back. It looks like, I don't know if it was a punt or whatnot, but they do have the ball. So we'll see what happens. 28-14 with the Buckeyes. Is there anything else on college football you want to touch on before we wrap this up?
Nothing really except, big win for Penn State last week. I think a lot of people picked against them. That defense looks really, really good.
Yeah, Penn State, another one of those, Big Ten teams that, it's kind of in it every year, it seems. They're kind of right there. Sometimes they have those top 10 teams, and then sometimes they're just not in it. So we'll see what happens this year if they can string it together and maybe make a nice run, for either a top bowl game or, college football playoffs. We never know what could happen in college football. But with that, I think that will do it for this week's episode of Outside the Arena. Once again, folks, if you are not already, please subscribe. We'd greatly appreciate it. Like the video, comment, all of that, it. Go follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, Outside the Arena there. Go follow our podcast Instagram, Outside the Arena Podcast. Both of our social medias will be right in the description as they always are. And yeah, guys, with that, I don't think I'm forgetting anything else. So with that, I appreciate it, guys. Have a great weekend and enjoy week 1 of the NFL season. Should be a fun one for sure.